Hi guys. In this video, I'm going to be showing how you can use Selenium in Django applications so that you can conduct functional testing. So let's start by installing Selenium on our Django application. In order to do so, before doing that, we need to make sure that we use a virtual environment to hold our dependencies. So you can run a command like this. So virtual env and whatever your environment name is. So run that command and they'll create a virtual environment. Once that's done, you can go into whatever you named it and you can type this. So if you type this command, it'll activate a virtual environment. I'm currently in a virtual environment, so which is dev end. So I'm just going to stay here. But this is what you have to do if you want to create a virtual environment. Now we'll have to install a Selenium using pip package manager. To do that, just run pip install Selenium, and so I've already got it installed. Next, we can open up our Django blog application. So this is an application that I forked from somewhere and I've been adding tests to. Most notably, I've been adding functional tests. So I'll share the GitHub link for this application in the video description, so you can go ahead and fork and clone and get access to this application locally. Um, Next, what we'll have to do is go to the test folder and create a func tests folder as well, standing for functional tests. Inside it, we can create a functest.py file. Make sure to import the following. And now we can start adding some of the basic stuff that we'll need in order to create some functional tests. First, we'll start out by adding a setup fixture. Um, so a fixture is something that helps run the test. It's not a test case in itself. It's just something that needs to occur in order for a test case to run. First, we're going to use the setup fixture that we define here. So what we're doing here is we're using Selenium's Firefox WebDriver to instantiate that WebDriver, and then we'll call the yield command. Yield basically means any test case that's written below this fixture will be run. And tear down we haven't typed yet, so let's do that now. So tear down is basically what will run after the initial test cases are run. So it's going to be self.browser.quit. So basically set up the browser, run the test cases, which we haven't added yet. And after you finish running the test cases, just tear it down by calling quit on the browser. So what happens normally is a web browser pops up whenever the WebDriver Firefox is run, and it'll do the functional tests, and then we're telling it to quit. Um, if you're wondering what auto use is auto use means basically that we want this method to run every single time a new test case occurs. So if auto use is not there, then this fixture will run once, and then all the test cases beneath it will run once as well, but it'll run. but this will only be run that initial time. But auto use would mean that once it's run for the first test case, once it goes to the second test case, setup is also run again. And then third test case, setup is run again. So I think you get the idea. So those are the fixtures that we'll be using. Next, let's type out our first test. So we're going to do, there's a special annotation that we need to use for Pytest to detect that this is indeed a test. Of doc page. So notice this naming scheme, naming convention for this method. Notice how it starts from test. So this is a requirement in Pytest. It requires that the first word of the name starts with test so that it can be identified as a test case. Also, we'll have to need the pytest mark.django.db annotation. I think this is to allow the pytest library to use the test database that's installed with Django, so SQLite test database. Next, we're going to call browser.get. So if you recall, in the fixture setup, we've instantiated the browser variable. And now what we're doing is just we're sending a GET request to it. Go to localhost port 8000. And that should be it. So now that we have our first test, so what this is doing is going to localhost 8000, and then once it's there, it'll check the page source. So the page source is something that's basically the web page in a text format, and it'll check this text format and search for the name blog. As this is a blogging application, the word blog is going to be mentioned repeatedly. And this is why we're asserting that blog should appear. So to make sure that we are indeed in the home page. So to run this, what we'll have to do is at the root folder of the application, we'll have to run pytest-s. -s is used for a more descriptive view of how it's run, PyTest runs. You can run it with just PyTest, but I prefer -s because we can see the traceback if a test case were to fail. And you can see a pop-up that pops up, and that's because of this test case right here. And it passes. So I have a bunch more unit tests here. So those are run relatively quickly, but we can see the pump functional test pop-up came up and it passed. So next, let's move on to the next test case. So this one's a bit more complex than the previous one. Localhost 8000. Browser, and we're going to say find element by class name. So basically go to localhost 8000 and then look for a class name with drop down toggle. So here's the blog application, and if we inspect this tab right here, we can see the class drop down toggle right here, and that's what we're targeting. Once we target this, uh, what we're going to do is click on it. So once we target this, we click on it, this drop down pops up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to validate that all articles, this link is visible. So once we click here, um, first we're going to do an assert in. Browser, so page source, same thing here. Self.assert. All. Now we're going to use XPath, which is kind of what Selenium is known for. XPath is something that makes it very convenient to target elements in a web page. It has a special syntax that we should follow, and here's the syntax. So what we're saying here is we're looking for an A tag or anchor element that has the text of all articles. So anchor element with the text of all articles, which you can see. So anchor element, all articles, that one, which is what we're targeting with the XPath. And then if all articles button is displayed, so this is pretty intuitive. It's just saying if this is visible, then assert true. In other words, pass this test case. If not, then fail the test case. Okay. So let's run Pytest S again. And this time you'll notice that two browser windows pop up. So one for the first test case, and as you saw there, one for the second. So this one failed. What is that? It could be a typo. Let's try again. Yep. So the second one ran first, and you can see a green dot there. So that means it passed. Yeah, so just watch out for the syntax. It's kind of tricky to get a hold of at first, but should get easier over time. Next, we're going to do another test case. And this one is basically checking if one of the post links work. So let's type this out. Browser find element by class name. So same thing as the second test case, but this time we're going to save the URL in the browser by doing this. So browser dot current URL. This is going to give the current URL that the browser is located at. Then we'll do first post link, and this is browser find element by XPath, and let me just copy this, and we're going to click post to. So if we go back to here and we inspect this anchor tag, we can see it has a href of post 2, post-2. if we go over here, we can see contains at href. So target the href which contains this criteria, post-2. Target that and then click it. So once that's clicked, we're going to create a new URL variable and assign the current URL. Then we're going to compare URLs. So this is done in order to check if when we click the post URL, it actually directs the browser to a different URL. If the old URL is not the same as new URL, it means the browser is at a different link. Therefore, we should pass the test case. If it is in the same URL, then it's obviously not doing what it's supposed to, and we should fail the test case. So let's wait for this to finish. And basically, what we're going to do next is we're going to add the fourth URL. So 3 passed. So let's add the fourth one. So the fourth one is going to be testing if the login button works. So go to localhost 8000, look for an anchor tag that has the href of login. So if we inspect this login element, we can see href of login, and this is going to be targeted and clicked on via click. And once we click this, we want the login URL to be saved as a variable called login URL. And now we're going to say if login URL is equal to login URL, then we assert true. So you might be wondering, where did we define self.login URL, right? So this is just going to be a constant that's going to be located up here. Let me see here. So it's going to be login URL localhost 8000 login. So that's the login URL that we want. And this is a good practice to have constants instead of hard-coded names like this, because changing it once from here will change it for all of them. So that's a good design to keep in mind. And we'll finish off by, instead of running this, we will also create a new test case because it's very similar to the one we just added. We're going to test the admin works self. Okay. Let me get the href for this. So go to localhost 8000 and then search for an anchor tag with the admin href, which is right there. Once it's found, click it. And you might be wondering, what if Selenium cannot find a specified element using an href? In that case, what would happen is just an error would be thrown that the specified element could not be found or something along those lines. So now along the same lines of the previous test case, we're going to assert true if the new URL equals the admin URL, and or fail it if it does not. And now we have to define admin URL up here. admin. Okay, this is kind of let me paste that here. So this is going to be the admin URL that we're going to compare that URL to the current URL. So now we're ready to run our tests. So let's run. This might take a while because functional tests typically take a lot more time than unit tests because there's a lot more involved. You have to fire up the browser. You have to do XPath to find various elements. And as you saw there, that's the admin page that was being displayed. And that's the login page. So we know that, and you can see those three dots right there means each passing case. And let's wait for it to finish up. Yeah, and then it's done. So this is a very basic introduction into how to do functional tests with Selenium on Django applications. If you want the GitHub link to this application, I'll link it in the video description along with the corresponding blog post for this tutorial so that you can have a better idea of how to do this. And yeah, that's all I wanted to share with you guys. I hope you learned something. If this was helpful, please like and subscribe. If you have any constructive criticisms on how I can improve, please let me know in the comments. And thanks and have a great day. Bye.